that just lost their jobs. Where's the better deal for today's families? And I know that come January, and in my discussions this week with Nova Scotia Power, who are being inundated by the churches calling them already saying, we're out of money. I know, Mr. Speaker, in January, those people are going to be coming to me saying, I can't hang out my clothes. Mr. Speaker, I can't hang out my clothes, but I can't feed my family and I can't pay for the roof over my head. That's what Nova Scotians want to know, that this government understands. Bill 113, I'll support it. Congratulate the member. He'll go away in due time, knowing that he finally has this passed. But what Nova Scotians are out there saying right now, Mr. Speaker, is that this government, and I heard them once in opposition say the former government was out of touch. Well, let me tell you, Bill 113, when it was announced last week, and this suburban task force was put forward, the question of what's going to be next. Are they going to tackle youth crime? Are they going to tackle graffiti with the municipality? What is this suburban task force going to do? What's important in Nova Scotians' lives? We have an injured worker up in the gallery, Mr. Speaker. These are the issues that we should be talking about. But I'll support Bill 113. But I would be remiss, and I know, again, it's difficult, but I have an obligation to the people of my community to speak to the inadequacy of the piece of legislation that's before us now as far as carrying a huge impact in Nova Scotians' lives. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. I will recognize the honourable member for Hammond Plains Upper Sackville on an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Certainly, it's an honour today to stand and introduce the House to a good friend of mine, Gregor Ash. He is the and his daughter Imogen. Gregor is the NDP candidate for Halifax West and the next MP for Halifax West. So I'd ask him to stand and receive the warm welcome of the House.
We welcome all visitors to the gallery and hope you enjoy the proceedings. I will now recognize the honourable member for Cape Breton North.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And hark, the herald, the dippers sing. Here they are again. The NDP songbook being sung out across the land. And I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, with regards to this bill.
Order, please. The honourable member for Cape Breton North has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And indeed, you know, I have a lot of respect for the Honourable Minister of Energy and know his long history in this House and the community. And I suppose when coming to government, there are certain obligations you have to try to fulfill to appease certain members of your caucus. And what we see as a result of that is Bill 113. Because, you know, as we have witnessed and know, that at the end of the day, while we are talking about hanging clothes out, as I say, it's really Nova Scotians that have been hung out to dry thus far in this session, and that's what we've seen from this government with its actions. And so to try and get up here, Mr. Speaker, and talk with regards to a clothesline bill, I mean, really, what have we brought ourselves to in the sense of what this House should be doing? Because the truth of the matter is, why wouldn't the minister or the government bring forward a bill and just cede these things over to municipalities and they can make their decisions on a community-by-community basis rather than having to feel there's going to be a need to cherry-pick? But we do know that maybe this is one of those things that the new glee club that was established by the Minister of Service Nova Scotia is going to have those 5 members to do, because they're going to go out and hang up clotheslines now as part of their endearing themselves to the people of Metro Halifax. So we have the glee members are going to be out there doing their routine and trying to woo the masses, thinking that clotheslines are what's going to get them re-elected in Nova Scotia. But you know, Mr. Speaker, that ain't cutting it, and Nova Scotians know it. But I'll tell you, we're talking about clotheslines, and the member from Halifax, Buckdoe, and he's literally had his airing of his issue. He finally got a piece of legislation on the floor. He finally has an opportunity to suggest that he has done something, so wherever he goes, that indeed he'll be able to say, well, look at the great things we're doing and we're reducing our environmental footprint. Well, I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, I'm sure the uptake's going to be so massive. I'm sure he's thought through, I'm sure, how he's going to get all the clothes props. I mean, they're going to take down an urban forest to get all these clothes props to go with their clotheslines they're going to put out. I mean, Mr. Speaker, you know, the other thing is I look at it from the point of view of soon they're going to do this and there's going to be clotheslines everywhere because the Glee Club that the Service Nova Scotia minister has established is going to be out there putting them up. Then the next thing you're going to know, they're going to have to bring in new covenants and amend the legislation because people are being offended by unmentionables being hung out to dry so that small children and people over 80 shouldn't see them. Is that what we're reducing ourselves here with these bills? Because that's what the NDP are talking about. And then it's not just starting with your clothes dryer, because the washing machines are next, because the member for Halifax-Shabuk does all have us down to the river to wash soon. And, you know, and make sure he's getting a full, because, you know, washing machines are using up too much energy as well. I mean, where is the line drawn when it comes to this government? And it's not just the ones they're hanging Nova Scotians out on, Mr. Speaker. It's a reality that this NDP government is willing to tie up good, valuable time to the tune of $20,000 a day to have us come and talk about the former member of the former opposition member's ability to say, I got something done. And that'll appease me so I don't have to speak for the next little while because I haven't been able to to this point. And that's the reality because, you know, when you get up and deal with these issues, someone has to look at what are the details. And the member talked about all the great things they're doing. Well, you know, tidal energy, previous governments worked on putting forward and did the cooperation regionally with tidal energy projects that move forward, that the current government likes to pat themselves on the back and say that they've done. When they talk about DSM, the demand side management aspects that have all been put in, and he wanted to say that this was just a slight to the Conserve Nova Scotia efforts, and that this was just a joke before to try and diminish. But all of a sudden, it's a good idea now. And if it was, then I would hope that the government would have packaged things with regards to an urban or an energy package or a government bill that actually brought all these matters together if they were truly serious. But they had to piecemeal it so someone could have credit for this bill and someone get credit for that bill rather than doing what was necessary. Then we talk about wind power. Well, you know, if the member was that convinced that we should be more environmentally enthusiastic. Well, why isn't the wind tower up on Citadel Hill now? But I guess that would impact the view of the hill. So therefore, that'd be an issue because my heavens, green energy from Citadel Hill being generated, but it isn't within the confines of what the view of the hill folks would think is there. But you can put a clothesline up on Citadel Hill. I'm sure the garrison is going to have clotheslines strung out and all of the uniforms will be fully on display and not just marching around Citadel Hill, according to this. And I'm sure the Glee Club will get together and find a way to go out and amass the people of the city to get out there and start stringing things up like Whoville at Christmas time. The lines will go left, right, and center. That's what we're coming to. And, you know, and I'm just waiting for Dr. Seuss, Chairman Dexter, to decide how he's going to start conducting. What song, what theme song?
Order, please. The honourable member, I reminded you last week that it's the Honourable Premier. I will ask you to retract that, please.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I haven't had to retract Chairman Dexter before, although you don't like it being used. But however, I'm sure that the Premier will figure out the theme song to what the Glee Club is going to have to go out and string songs to, because it helps for those working songs, just like back in the milling frolics. I'm sure there must be a Glee Club frolic coming so that the NDP, when they're sitting around the caucus table, will have a new milling song, and maybe the minister responsible for Gaelic affairs can come up with a Gaelic milling song for the clothesline Glee Club members to go around Metro and not only help them understand the new advantages to the green energy outcomes they're going to have, but they'll actually learn a little bit more about cultural diversification so that if everyone puts out a clothesline, we won't have to have windmills on the top of Citadel Hill, so the view of the Citadel will be maintained. And we see now very much a conspiratory theorist with regards to what you have to do to get a bill forward in the House and what the outcomes are that this government want. But you know, Mr. Speaker, we talk about solar power, and we've had a bill before the House, and some of these things have great merit. And again, part of the cause is that this government is disconnected, if not dysfunctional, in how they bring things together. And people wonder why the public is wondering what the heck is going on, and they wonder about people's confidence. And we can make light of things, but I know they talked with Lower Churchill. Well, I remember back to the energy days when we were dealing with within the portfolio and dealing with Newfoundland and Labrador and other colleagues. Back in the time when very much the Lower Churchill was under development, at that time the code word was it was the Anglo-Saxon route. You know, that was it, anything but coming through Quebec, and people were looking at that, and the province was talking about would they like to partner, and at that time, Newfoundland was looking at all of its options, and finally an outcome has come, but that's been long-standing with regards to dialogue. Glad that things could come forward and get to a modern state, because there are substantive things and much larger issues. And the Lower Churchill does speak to the types of things we should be discussing here, the types of projects, the types of economic development initiatives that should be on the floor of the legislature for discussion, but instead we're talking about a clothesline. Well, my grandmother could have told the member opposite, common sense would allow government to do common sense things without tying up the time of this legislature when regulation and the cabinet's ability to do things is there before them, but instead they need some photo op, they need some optics to put out there, and instead we're not talking about the real needs of Nova Scotians. We're not talking about the fact that this government has driven up unemployment rates in Southwest Nova and Yarmouth. They're not talking about the Nova Scotians that are at work. They're not talking about the broken commitments that they've made to the people of Spring Hill. Mr. Speaker, they couldn't even keep the ship Hector afloat. That had to be sold off, and what the heck's next? This government has not dealt with the things that are important to Nova Scotians, as we know. Walk away from any commitment, take investments out of the justice portfolio, take police officers off the street, take opportunities away, pit rural against urban against rural Nova Scotians. That's what we're doing. But what are we doing? And those issues that should be talked about here, we're talking about a clothesline. We're talking about a clothesline because a member needs to have some sense that I got something of this government before I'm gone from government. That's what we know. And yes, and you know, it wasn't even allowed to introduce his own bill. And maybe because it was a private member's bill, I guess you know where it was going from there. But we all know that we all maintain and still have a very high level of respect for the Minister of Energy. So if we bring it in as an energy bill, we're not going to want to, you know, dump Bill's bill, because we're going to want to respect a member who has had a good tradition in this House and who is respected, I believe, unilaterally around the House, and at the same time will provide a buffer for another member with a frivolous matter that should have been dealt with outside this House. It should have been dealt with not tying up the time of this House. And as I said earlier, Mr. Speaker, with regards to other bills that are brought forward, it's not that we want to be standing up here talking about a clothesline bloody bill. We want to be standing here talking about the issues that are important to Nova Scotians, and we want to make sure, Mr. Speaker, that the real issues affecting Nova Scotians are being talked about, and we're trying to highlight the fact that it's a sad day when we have to be here in a session of the legislature during an economic downturn. We're trying to get recovery. We have people bringing in clothesline bills. That's the reality of what we have. When this government knows it could have acted unilaterally, could have done it from the cabinet room, could have patted themselves on the back, but they wouldn't be satisfied with a press release because they needed to count bills and they needed to appease people to say they got legislation through. That we know is a fact. That is the reality of where we are. That's why we're now part of a day that's costing taxpayers over $20,000, and the ensuing days will cost taxpayers, and hoping that frivolous matters like this, although the outcome not being frivolous, the way it's being presented is frivolous. We cannot be against reducing energy costs. We cannot be against allowing people to have access to a choice if that's what we want to do. But we can be against a government that goes at it in a bullheaded way, that goes at it from a perspective that is not one that is the normal process, not one that they couldn't have done elsewhere. The government knows that. The members know that. And that's why we're here at this almost 8:15 to 8:13. And here we are, a day that's costing Nova Scotians valuable money, and the lights are on here, and you know, they're not energy efficient lights in this building, Mr. Speaker. And you know, the lights aren't on in the government caucus, Mr. Speaker, I can tell you that. They went out a long time ago, and there ain't any energy efficiency bulb or any incandescent one's going to help them get to have the light bulb come on and realize that what they're doing as a government is harming the fundamental fabric of Nova Scotian society, is not doing anything to serve the interests of Nova Scotians, is not doing anything to improve legislative outcomes in this chamber, is not doing anything to improve relations with our municipalities around the province, other than but a small group of people. And, you know, we've talked about restrictive covenants. That was brought up. I'll tell you, there will be one restrictive covenant. It's called the next election, because Nova Scotians are going to restrict that lot's ability ever get to government again, because they're going to make sure that whatever the choice in the next election, it is not going to be a government that brings forward about clotheslines and clothes props and all these other frivolous things that should be dealt with in more efficient manners through other processes that don't tie up valuable resources at a time when we should be dealing with other things. So, Mr. Speaker, it's very clear to us that if we wanted to talk about energy, if we wanted to talk about the demand-side management, if we wanted to talk about renewables, it'd be a great thing to talk about. But when the government reduces themselves to clotheslines, and they reduces themselves to forming a glee club so they can go about, you know, hanging these clotheslines, putting in solar panels. I mean, they're going to be very busy. I mean, you know, they must be doing training from, you know, the Beaver Pack. The Boy Scouts that were here today, at least are constructive. They're trying to find out and learn, and they go out to do things and do good deeds. And you know, Mr. Speaker, if the government committed themselves to in the same manner as the training of the young individuals that were here today, we'd probably be better. But what standard? We had a bunch of young people come in and be introduced, and yet we're talking about a clothesline. A clothesline. And they're wondering about their future. They're wondering about the debt. This lot is compounding for them, that those young, resourceful young scouts are going to have to put their scouting techniques to work to try and find new ways to grow an economy that these people are reducing, find new ways to create jobs that these people are destroying, find a new way to deal with legislation that will provide them a future that they can have. And the covenant should be by this government to make life better for those young scouts that were here today. Instead, we're making it less. And we're reducing it because we're putting a cost on them that is coming as a result of frivolous things done for very petty political reasons rather than for substantive reasons, and having a full debate about renewable energy and about the economy of this province and how we can move forward. But that's what we're down to. And so with that, Mr. Speaker, I'm sure the minister, when he gets his bill through, will have a great day of proclamation, and the Glee Club will be there with their pom-poms to cheer on the Minister of Energy and to hoist the member for Halifax-Chebucto up on their shoulders and give him the line to string yet another line out to Nova Scotians. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I recognize the member for Richmond.
Mr. Speaker, I would be remiss if I did not take my place to say a few words on Bill number 113, appropriately named the Clothesline Act. Mr. Speaker, I was elected on March 24, 1998, at the same time as the member for Halifax-Chebucto, and I recall in this House in 2007 when he brought in a similar piece of legislation. It may actually have been named the same, the Clothesline Act. And I remember at that time that we thought, as a private member's bill, that this was something that was of interest and was of concern to the member from Halifax-Chebucto, and that was the appropriate place to bring it in as a private member's bill. It was something that he had obviously researched and he had some information on, and I think he said tonight he received emails, he received phone calls, and obviously there was some follow-up to this. So when you have an issue such as this, the place for it is a private member's bill. And if the government had allowed the member for Halifax-Chebucto to introduce this legislation as a private member, and tonight would have called it as a private member's bill, I think the discussion tonight would have been significantly different, because it was an issue of concern to the member. I believe we had a private member's bill for the member for Halifax Atlantic dealing with the merging of the Royal Yacht Club or something along that nature, and that's appropriately a private member's bill. But instead, the government took the member from Halifax-Chebucto's bill from 2007 and said, we feel it's so important, we're going to make it government policy and bring it in as a government piece of legislation. That is where, Mr. Speaker, I believe you see where the debate has gone tonight, and the fact that we're now entering into the realm of being ridiculous, and the ideas that this government is bringing forward at a time when there are so many other issues facing Nova Scotians. So one has to ask, a majority government with one of its own members who had introduced legislation, why would they not allow him to reintroduce it and call it a private member's bill? So you know what, Mr. Speaker? I think it had a pretty good chance of being passed considering this government has a majority. So one has to ask, why would you not do that? And I would suggest to you, Mr. Speaker, as others have suggested, is because, unfortunately, I believe the member from Halifax, Chebucto, is still not in the good graces of this government due to some of the statements that he has made. And I believe when he stood up and he started his comments by saying it's not often governments have good ideas, but this is an example of a good idea, I think he was sending a message to the front benches and sending a message to his colleagues. Because, no, well, you know, the member from Halifax, Sable Island said it's a stretch. I don't consider it a stretch. The member stood there and said, there's not often that there's a good idea, and he hasn't seen much, but this was one. So how can you not interpret that that's a shot directly at the Minister of Finance, at the Minister of Justice, and at others on the front bench, that he's not overly impressed with what they've been doing to date? And I have to say, Mr. Speaker, I kind of share his opinion when it comes to that. That I have not been overly impressed either. So, Mr. Speaker, again, if we were having this discussion as a private member's bill, I think most people would have seen it for what it was, a small local issue. But, Mr. Speaker, what was embarrassing is to read about the bill briefing where the Minister of Energy presented this piece of legislation talking about all Nova Scotians throughout the province who couldn't put up a clothesline, and when the media said, well, give us an example, he didn't have one. Tonight, fortunately, his staff obviously did some research, and they gave him an example of a community in the valley, so he could use that in his statement tonight. But I'm sure that the Minister of Energy went back after that briefing and said, what happened? And why am I introducing this bill as government policy, talking about Nova Scotians who can't put up clotheslines, and no one even gave me an example to give? But had it been the member for Halifax Chebucto bringing his private member's bill, I think it's quite clear tonight he could have rhymed off a number of examples of where he saw that Nova Scotians might not clearly have been permitted to put up a clothesline. So I believe in many ways, Mr. Speaker, the actions of the government has backfired on them in the way that this has been brought forward. And I'm sure Nova Scotians who are watching tonight and those who will be following this legislature are really shaking their heads to believe that the government has brought in legislation as government legislation to deal with clotheslines. Speaker, I recall in this House, for example, when I talk about private members' bills and how they're treated a bit differently, I believe we had a bill declaring a certain rock to be the official rock of Nova Scotia. We had a certain bill dealing with naming a flower as the official flower of Nova Scotia, the official dog of Nova Scotia. The horse, the official horse of Nova Scotia. Each and every one of those bills came in as private members' bills, which was the appropriate place for them. Tonight, I would suggest to you, bringing in a clothesline bill as government legislation, I believe at the end of the day will truly prove to be an embarrassment to the government when they'll return to their ridings and tell their constituents, what did you do this week? Well, we debated having a clothesline bill in the province. Mr. Speaker, the discussion tonight has proven that there are few Nova Scotians that are prevented from being able to put up a clothesline or do have concerns that they might be violating some restrictive covenants, yet it's being brought in as government policy. Mr. Speaker, usually with such matters, you'd have a petition signed by Nova Scotians about an issue of concern to them that they are asking the legislature to address on their behalf. Yet there's no petitions about people not being able to put up clotheslines. The Minister of Energy gave us one example of a community where this was the case. So we're left to wonder, is this an issue of concern to Nova Scotians from Sydney to Yarmouth that we should be debating here in this House? I would suggest to you it is not. And one of the other issues I want to touch on is comments made by the Minister of Energy with regards to whether legislation should come in as an omnibus bill, meaning that it would be a collection of different bills being changed under one piece of legislation. I do fear that the Minister of Energy may have misinterpreted my comments in that regard. It's quite possible maybe he's thinking of comments made by others, but my comments were regarding justice bills that were making minor amendments to existing legislation. Now, I would not suggest that this bill should come in as an omnibus bill as part of another package. I would suggest to you it should have remained as a private member's bill. But putting in a Justice Administration Act that makes minor amendments to legislation that's already been passed by this House, in fact, legislation passed last session, that is where I believe it's appropriate that those could have been merged together. So I do hope that that helps the Minister of Energy better understand my concerns, because as he complained, I complained about bills being put together that had no relation, that were new legislation, and may not be clearly understood by Nova Scotians. So I would not have suggested that this bill come in as part of a package, but again, I would certainly suggest it should have remained as a private member's bill. Mr. Speaker, I would be remiss as well if I did not make some mention of the new suburban dream team that has been put together by the government, because and I know the member from Cape Breton North has come up with a very, I believe, thoughtful and appropriate term himself. I know it's a very popular show today, and Nova Scotians will certainly relate to it, as it appears this committee would meet some of the same objectives as that show. But what was striking to me when I talk about why the government would not have called this as a private member's bill introduced by the member from Halifax-Chebucto is the obvious absence of who is not on the suburban team. The member for Halifax-Chebucto has been left out. So this is a suburban team dealing with matters affecting the HRM and regional municipality, yet they have left out a member who is a professor at the Dalhousie Law School dealing with municipal law. A former municipal councillor, someone who obviously has a significant depth of knowledge on suburban issues, and yet he is left off that team. Which leads me to wonder, why would you take who's probably your most experienced member and knowledgeable on these issues, and you left him off the team? So, and I'm sure many Nova Scotians are wondering the same. I'm sure the residents of Halifax-Chebucto are probably wondering, why would their member not be included on this to share his knowledge, share his experience? And you know, right now, I would believe that the member for Halifax-Chebucto probably has some time that he'd be prepared to dedicate to this team, and some suggestions that he would want to bring forward. You know, and I don't think they'd be limited to how to hang clothes. He told us that he wasn't going to tell us how to do that, but I'm sure he has other ideas that he could have shared. Yet, that's the first thing. When I saw the team, I started reading. I was waiting for the name of and I can't say his personal name here, but the member for Halifax-Chebucto. I said, obvious choice. He probably should be the chair of this committee. He's obviously going to be on it. Yet he's left out. Yet when we suggest that the government may not be having the best of relations with the member for Halifax-Chebucto, they get very upset at us for making that suggestion. But that's unfortunate, Mr. Speaker, because Nova Scotians were told that the NDP would be different when they're in government, but we're seeing more and more old style of governing. And when a member on their side speaks out, there's a punishment that comes as a result. I believe the way the government has brought in this bill is an example of that punishment. I believe being left off the suburban team is an example of that punishment. And I think it's unfortunate, Mr. Speaker, because we all got sent here to do our job. I think we all have a role to play. Having had the opportunity to be in government, starting off in the backbench and then working my way to cabinet, I can tell you what a difference it makes, the ability to be in government and how much can be achieved. And I believe it's unfortunate that the government has decided, rather than allowing their members to speak freely, something the NDP used to stand for, that when one of their own members chooses to do so, there's repercussions and there's discipline that comes as a result. Nova Scotians were told this government would do things differently. Instead, what we're seeing is some of the same old politics, just by a different color. And Mr. Speaker, again, as I've mentioned on a number of the justice bills, I believe there are many pressing issues that we should be debating here in this chamber, issues that affect the daily lives of Nova Scotians. This is not one of those issues, but had it been brought in as a private member's bill, I certainly would have had much more respect for the government for allowing one of their own members to bring forward an issue which they have been pursuing that affects a small group of Nova Scotians. Bringing this in as government policy, I know the member for Halifax-Chebucto did his best to try to link this as part of an overall energy strategy. I want to commend him for being creative in doing so. He kept a straight face while doing so, as challenging as it was to haul in a clothesline with the Fundy tides and with the hydroelectricity deal with Newfoundland. It was very creative. I do have to give him that. But Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians are practical people. They are a people that are very resourceful, suggesting that government policy has to help Nova Scotians because they can't put up clotheslines, and that is something that we should champion in this chamber as part of our deliberations and dealing with the issues facing our province. I think is a disservice to those who have sent us here in the way it's been presented. Again, had it been presented as a private member's bill, I certainly would have not had the issue that I have in seeing that other government priorities are being set aside in order for us to be dealing with a clothesline bill. Mr. Speaker, at the end of the day, it is Nova Scotians that will have the ultimate say and the ultimate judgment on this government's decision of putting a clothesline bill as part of its priority in this fall session. Merci.
If I recognize the Honourable Minister, it will be to close debate on Bill 113.
I can close debate in a very efficient way, and I can assure you that I'm not going to take the time of the House. I'd like rising to close debate on Bill 113. I look forward to going to law amendments, and I thank the members opposite for their comments, believe it or not.
The question is for second reading of Bill 113. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favour say aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. The bill is carried.
Bill number 113, an act to prevent prohibitions on the use of clotheslines.
Ordered that this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, could you please call Bill 114 Anti-Idling Act?
I recognize the Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm rising today to move second reading of Bill number 114, the Anti-Idling Bill. Our government introduced this bill because we recognize the importance of protecting the environment and the role we have in setting the right example for all Nova Scotians. We are demonstrating true leadership and, more importantly, protecting the health and the prosperity of our province. Mr. Speaker, this bill produces actions that will help us reduce the environmental impact of our transportation operations and move us toward our target set out in the Climate Change Action Plan and Environment Goals and Sustainable Prosperity Act. By taking action, this government will help reduce harmful exhaust emissions, which, as we know, pollute our air and affect people's health. Mr. Speaker, I think you and all the members of this House will see that this bill is one of the many actions we are taking to reduce harmful air emissions. Nova Scotia was the first province in Canada to place hard caps on greenhouse gas and air pollutants emissions in the electricity sector, an initiative that won us an award in the United Nations Conference on the Climate Change in Copenhagen. And the Eco Nova Scotia for Climate Change and Climate Change Program, a $42.5 $5 million fund help Nova Scotians, business, community groups, and municipalities reduce emissions. With support from this program, over 140 projects in communities all over the province are helping to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by more than 300,000 tons and air pollutants by more than 750,000 kilograms each year. This government is further reducing greenhouse gas emissions through projects such as the construction of green buildings, the LED roadway lighting pilots, efficiency upgrades to public buildings, and greening initiatives for school bus carriers. Mr. Speaker, this project supports our expert commitment, which for this year includes sulfur dioxide reductions in the adoption of Canada-wide standards for fine particulate matter and ground level ozone. These are important air quality goals, and we are committed to achieving them. Mr. Speaker, this legislation, we are taking yet another step to improve the quality of life for all Nova Scotians families. We will create a government-wide policy that takes all motor vehicles and motorized equipment used for government businesses subject to new anti-idling rules. An effort to be green are not the role of the responsibility of one department. We recognize that some departments, such as transportation and infrastructure renewal, already have a policy in place. However, our plan is to multiply the benefits by ensuring all government employees comply with the corporate approach. This legislation is about showing leadership and educating about the benefits of anti-idling. We recognize education is a key to behavioral change and that we have addressed some of the more common issues straight on. Mr. Speaker, we have made a fact sheet on idling available to the department through the department's website that clearly illustrates the benefits of turning off the ignition. These facts include such things as idling decreases the operating life of an engine oil by 75%. Idling for more than 10 seconds uses more fuel than restarting your engine. And drivers don't need to warm up their car engines before driving on a cold day. Mr. Speaker, every step we take to green the government and high-emission industry brings us closer to achieving our environmental goals and showing our citizens that making green choices does pay back. Nova Scotians are passionate about protecting the environment for our own enjoyment and for the future generations. We want to protect it and our way of life despite the economic challenges. Mr. Speaker, we are confident that more Nova Scotians and Nova Scotians businesses will follow suit by reducing their own idling, a small change with a big impact. Their participation will demonstrate the socially and economically or environmentally responsible behavior that Nova Scotians are admired for and resulted in more money in their pockets. Mr. Speaker, we are leading by example, taking action to further protect our environment and help the Nova Scotian, and while finding even more ways to live within our means. To me, all these reasons combined make for good legislations that everyone can support. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for your time.
I recognize the member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When I heard that when the Minister's Department sort of notified us the day before that they would be introducing anti-idling legislation, I was actually quite interested. I had actually expected they would follow the Wolfville model just as they had followed the Wolfville model with some other, geez, I can't remember which piece of legislation it was, but I believe there was a piece of legislation earlier in one of the other sessions that they had modeled some of their attempts on. And so I was a bit surprised that when I got the bill that the, once you get past the definitions, it's a bill that consists of 43 words, one clause, covers only departments and agencies that, according to Idle Free Nova Scotia, already have policies in place. There might be, I'm sure there's like some little exception, like the, I don't know, maybe the Can't even think of one. I'm sure there is an exception to one, but they couldn't come up with one, Idle-Free Nova Scotia. So we talked to the Ecology Action Centre today. They couldn't come up with anybody that's covered by this bill that actually doesn't already have a policy. And in fact, the Ecology Action Centre, Mr. Speaker, actually said something really interesting to me. They said that the minister's staff, when they expressed concern, I guess, that this required just a policy and there was no action and didn't actually cover very much. And they were told, oh, that's okay because we're going to amend it before third reading. So I'm just interested to know what amendments the department staff is suggesting to the Ecology Action Centre that they're going to propose to strengthen this bill. Because it sounds like they've already made that commitment to other organizations. And I know that the Ecology Action Centre is coming to law amendments or is registered to come to law amendments on this bill with the expectation that the bill will be strengthened. And it was actually, they commented on strengthening it in the press release that they put out. So, and I called them just to find out because, you know, I often speak as the minister, I'm sure the minister does as well in his department with the centre, just, you know, to find out their position and their perspective. And they are under the full expectation that the government intends to strengthen this prior to a final reading. So I'm interested to see where that's going. Now, maybe they misinterpreted the comments. I'm certainly not suggesting for a second that the minister said that to them, but obviously that was an impression they got from somebody in the department. Mr. Speaker, the minister's, I agree with much of what the minister said in his remarks. He went through a number of initiatives that the government is doing to reach their climate change and emissions requirements. Of course, none of that has very much to do with the bill. In fact, at the press conference, the minister also said some things that are quite right. He talked about the savings that can be generated in the trucking industry by reducing idling, and he mentioned the lobster fishing. Of course, they're not covered by this bill either. You know, Mr. Speaker, the thing is that this is a bill that I have to sit there. You know, I completely agree that idling is an issue. I know that it can save, not only is there an emissions issue, but reducing the amount of idling can save money for everybody. It doesn't matter what you drive, even if you're like the Minister of Finance and drive a hybrid vehicle, it'll still, you know, I'm sure it can still save you money in certain circumstances. I'm sure there's times that his vehicle, if it was idling, uses gas as well. But you know, Mr. Speaker, when we look at public transit systems, and obviously the largest one in the province is HRM, and they already have an anti-idling policy for their whole unit. Almost pretty well every government department provincial government department is listed on Idle-Free Nova Scotia as having a policy. Ambassadors here, which would be an example of a private business covered by this, they have an anti-idling policy in place. So I'm just trying to find out why. Why is this legislation here? Because it only covers organizations that pretty well all have them, and it's something that, you know, we can debate a lot of things about whether it can be done through regulation or cabinet orders and bills, and some things I agree with the members opposite that there's some things that are sort of in that gray area. Maybe they can, maybe they can't be. And I'll go back to a bill I mentioned earlier. The Nova Scotia Museum Act that the Minister of Tourism has brought forward is one where people thought that it could have been done by cabinet order. It turns out it can't. Now has to come by legislation. So fine, there are examples. But my goodness, Mr. Speaker, this is certainly one that could have been done by a cabinet order or a letter you know, he talks about education. Well, I'm reasonably certain that there is no legislation on the books currently prohibiting the minister's department from doing education on anti-idling, and I would encourage him to do that. I very much would, because I think it's important. The member for, what's Chuck's riding? The member for Hants West, thank you to the Minister for the member for Cape Breton North for providing that. And I recently were out with Clean Nova Scotia doing some driving things and measuring fuel consumption. Oh, the member for Hammonds Plains Upper Sackville also was doing that too. And you know, and it's important, and I think that all of us learn that you know, there are driving techniques and idle avoidance techniques that can reduce the amount of fuel used, and it's important. So I don't disagree with the minister that it's important. I don't disagree with that, but I'm not really sure what the point of this legislation is, Mr. Speaker. The problem here is that you're talking about school buses. Well, you go again. And listen, everybody with an idling policy in Nova Scotia is not listed on Idle Free Nova Scotia's website by any stretch. Yet most of the school boards are listed here already for their school buses. Most of the tour bus companies have signed on. In fact, they were the first ones for the very reason that the minister pointed out, that they're going to save money. They may not even care about the emissions issues. Their concern is that it was costing them money to have those buses idle. And so when we look at this, it suggests that the government of the one clause that actually has any effect that isn't definitions is that the government of the province and every person that owns or operates or manages or controls a public passenger vehicle shall establish in writing on or before October 1st next year, doesn't matter, they all have them anyways, and thereafter maintain in effect an anti-idling policy that promotes reduction of unnecessary idling. Well, the problem with that, it doesn't, all you have to do is have a policy and a written piece of paper that says that you won't idle when it's not necessary. Well, Mr. Speaker, I remember speaking at a Sierra Club event a number of years ago, and we were talking about idling, and somebody asked about police cars at the time. Now, of course, police cars aren't covered by this act, but somebody asked why the police cars idle all the time. Now, depending on who you ask, there's some police officers that won't idle, and there's some that say they need to idle because the computer equipment drains the battery quickly. And listen, I don't know which is the truth. Maybe the truth is somewhere in the middle, but is that unnecessary idling if that was a passenger vehicle? If, is warming up the school bus before leaving unnecessary idling? It's really a very wishy-washy statement at best. And I do not know, the minister, the part of the minister's remarks that respectfully, Mr. Speaker, I disagree with, is that he suggests that this is about education and promoting anti-idling. But I'm not sure that this does that, because, Mr. Speaker, this doesn't say that people shouldn't idle. It doesn't say the policy has to require a reduction in idling. It doesn't say that the policy has to be is enforced through some kind of penalties or that it'll be checked. It doesn't say that it'll be a condition of a motor carrier license for tour bus operators. It doesn't say any of that. It doesn't say that for the province of Nova Scotia departments, it doesn't say that there will be performance benchmarks. None of that. It doesn't say what a policy would be. In fact, in a page of definitions, policy isn't even defined. Is a policy a paragraph just saying that we agree in principle that idling is bad? Well, I would challenge anybody in this legislature to suggest that unnecessary idling is a good thing. I think we all agree with that. But it strikes me the only thing idling is the NDP's agenda. And so it's a way to put something in place. And just, a number of people have commented on having another bill and having another bill. Promoting private companies and the government and tour bus operators and school bus operators and even individuals to have a policy on anti-idling and to think about anti-idling is very, very important. But there is absolutely no reason why you need to do this through legislation. There's no reason at all. There is nothing, and Mr. Speaker, my first reaction was there's nothing in this that has to be by legislation, that couldn't be done by a letter or by a cabinet order or a directive or a statement by the minister's department. And I've since talked to a number of other organizations and said, am I missing something here? Is there something that there has to be legislation to accomplish this? And I've yet to find anybody that could give me a reason why this has to be in legislation to do what is done in this bill. If you were going to do more than this, which as I say, getting back to how I started this, when I received the call saying the minister tomorrow will introduce a bill promoting anti-idling, I said, all right, I was expecting something that was actually going to have effect. And we would have had a substantive debate in this legislature on the issue of whether that is appropriate at this time, whether it's the right way to go, and we would have had a debate about that, and there would have been different opinions of how to do it. But this is about writing a policy, and it's about organizations which, for the most part, all have the policies already and have signed pledges long before most of them before this government was even in power. So it just doesn't. It's frustrating, Mr. Speaker, because it's particularly frustrating because I listened to what the minister said and I agree with everything he said. I applaud his department for some of the initiatives they've taken on some of the environmental initiatives. I honestly do. And when I listened to the minister speak at the press conference, I listened to him talk very passionately about how, as I say, the trucking industry and all these industries and individuals can learn so much by avoiding idling. And I thought what he said was very from the heart. It was very passionate, and he was absolutely right in all the things that he said in that media briefing and in the House. But this bill doesn't do any of the things that he talked about in the media briefing. It doesn't cover any of the organizations that he said would save money by anti-idling, such as the lobster industry and the trucking industry and so forth. It doesn't even require them to have a policy, and yet those are the ones that he talked about, real benefits. And I agree that there are benefits. I really do agree with that. And so, Mr. Speaker, I just really believe that this is a case where, I think that we all would have complimented the minister for coming out and having an education program on anti-idling, and I hope he'll still do that. And we would have complimented him for doing that and suggested, and on a go-forward basis we will. But Mr. Speaker, 43 words to pass a bill that has no practical effect. It just has to make me wonder. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I recognize the honourable member for Cape Breton North.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And here we go again. Here we go again, Mr. Speaker. Another unnecessary bill at a time that it's necessary for this House to be debating the important issue before Nova Scotians and issues within the Department of Environment that one would hope that would be more pressing and important. The minister knows in his briefing books are issues that Nova Scotians have as pressing matters, and I don't believe, Mr. Speaker, that the minister awoke before this session and went into cabinet and said, hang on, this got to get through. This has to be done. I suspect the department was trying to desperately come up with something and say, Minister, here's a bill we think we can do, and it's not going to matter, and it's not going to mean anything, but it's a bill, because you folks are looking for bills. And as the only environment bill, we've got to have something to say about the environment rather than something to really do that will improve the environment, because we do know that between the various ministries, whether it's the Minister of Education, comes to school buses, no problem there, that's a directive. Comes to passenger vehicles, no problem there. The Transportation or Service Nova Scotia in terms of licensing, no problem to do that. That can be done as a matter of regulation, and I just hope that government members are not naive to think that this stuff is being sold to them as legislation that is paramount to good public policy, because it's not. And I'm not going to go into this, Mr. Speaker, because there's not much to go into that hasn't already been said. It's just, unfortunately, another round of the legislative circle here at the House, this sitting, that is unfortunately not serving the best interests of Nova Scotians. It just, again, highlights the fact that the government's policy and legislative tank was empty. Some people scrambled to put some bills together to desperately try to say they had something to offer up in this need to count bills and mark time here at the House. The government goes and extends the hours for today because I actually thought we had some important things to discuss. My constituents, as every person here, have constituents have real issues. And you ask yourself, should we have been here from 4 to 10 versus dealing with the real issues of real people in their constituencies. And one could ask that about most of this session, because we all have no shortage of people with matters that are important. But you know, you get in your car, you drive 4.5, 5 hours here to Halifax because there's important, weighty matters the government has lined up for this sitting of the legislature that are going to really matter to the people, in my case, the Cape Breton North and every other of the 51 additional constituencies. And we find out we have a piece of legislation yet again that ministers or cabinet by directive and regulation could have easily handled this. They know that. We know that. Nova Scotians who may not understand the process enough may not know it and actually might think that this is something, again, it's always interesting, Mr. Speaker, by title, how it's very difficult to argue with the title of these bills, how to argue with the principle of what a bill might suggest. But the practicality of the matter and the issue is that government could have handled this in a much better way. Government could have been more constructive with their time, could have dealt with this, but what we found was we probably could have had a legislative session that maybe lasted 10 days based upon the content of legislation. But at $20,000 a day, what does it matter when you're racking up a deficit of over $1 billion of their own making? But that's what we find. Money has no matter over there because they don't seem to be concerned about who has to pay the bills. They just keep spending. They talk restraint. And this is all about, you know, proper restraint of habits and actions, but we have a minister who won't finance, that won't exercise restraint, won't take recommendations for restraint. Yet, you know, Mr. Speaker, I can think of 299 young women at Holy Angels High School that are wondering if they're going to have a future. Students by the dozens in various high schools throughout the Cape Breton Victoria District School Board that are wondering if they have an education choice for next year. Nope, they don't. That's the anti-idling they're waiting for. They're waiting for this government to stop idling on the matters of importance and deal with the matters that affects them and their lives and their future. So yet, the young women of Holy Angels High School have this government idling this house because the lights are on, the bills are being paid by virtue of deficit and debt financing of this out-of-control finance minister that doesn't understand, talks one thing, does another. That's what we've seen. And you know, he probably could tell and probably preach to the young women of Holy Angels about what would they cut for them to have their school. Because that's what he'd do. He'd go in and say to these 299 young women and say, well, listen, girls, what would you cut? Well, I can tell you right now, they'd cut him and 30 some other members of government. That's the first cut that would make sense to them and the best cut that would help their future and for them to be contributing members of society. Yet we have an anti-idling bill. They're wondered if they're going to have a school bus available to them or a transit bus. And I'm sure those 299 young women would love to have a choice of being helpful and help educate their drivers not to idle their buses if they had a school to go to next year. But this government won't commit to that. But they'll commit themselves to bringing in parliamentary fluff and smoke and mirrors and continue to do this. And that is incumbent upon us to make sure Nova Scotians know that tying up this legislature, spending needless resources, again, this is just one more piece of legislation that highlights and has to be discussed to show that this government is so out of touch with reality and out of touch with the priorities of working families and of our youth and of our communities. This government's more concerned about how they go about, oh yeah, and the glossy brochures and the fancy consultants, those are on the top tier. You know, you got Agent Orange doing all that stuff and being paid a king's ransom to talk about EAR closures, to produce a report that the minister knew the outcome before she even started. And yet, the minister doesn't mind idling on the matters that take leadership. Government doesn't mind holding up, costing Nova Scotians, wasting their time when they're concerned about these things. And Mr. Speaker, I can tell you, if we really want to serve Nova Scotians, we've addressed the issues that are important to them. So again, it's another opportunity. I know that if the government is sincere and wants to stop idling, they'll show up Friday night for the vigil for Holy Angels High School. They'll show up because those young women, as students, their family and community have to resort themselves to a vigil so that they can go and have to gather, wondering if this government will stop idling on making a true decision that is going to affect their future. That this government will invest in young women to have the best education. That when there is a best model available in this province for the only public girls' school east of Montreal with a 125-year history, this government can't make up their mind. Because you know what, Mr. Speaker, we know it's in a non-government riding. We know it is in an area where those young women who are being told what their bus drivers are being dictated by virtue of Bill 114, that the Minister of Education over there knows she could have done, that the other ministers could have provided their leadership.
Order. Order. Just wish to remind the honourable member that we do have Bill 113 before the House. Oh, sorry, 114. 114, thank you.
And Mr. Speaker, Bill 114 very much is about the girls at Holy Angels want to know that Bill 114, what it means for them. The girls at Holy Angels High School want to know why it is there isn't a police resource officer available to protect their neighborhood because this Minister of Justice has cut them back. The girls of Holy Angels High School are wondering, when it comes to Bill 114, what the Minister of Education is doing. The girls of Holy Angels High School want to know what the Minister of Transportation Infrastructure Renewal is doing with regards to the capital plan for their school. The girls of Holy Angels High School want to know with Bill 114 what the Minister of Finance is doing to finance their school. The girls of Holy Angels High School, when it comes to Bill 114, are wondering why it is a school for Liverpool has been approved. The Premier's got a notice out to approve a school for Yarmouth, yet he can't approve a school with Bill 114 for Amherst. What did I say? Yarmouth? Amherst. Well, he won't even approve a ferry for Yarmouth. I mean, cripes almighty. No, everyone's under the Dexter bus when it comes to Bill 114 all of a sudden. And Mr. Speaker, I'll tell you, the girls of Holy Angels High School care about the people from Yarmouth. They actually care about the students in Liverpool having a better education, care about the students in Amherst. They care that Bill 114 should mean something to them, but the government doesn't think that they mean anything to them. That's what Bill 114 is doing. The Minister of Finance has said one thing, does another all the time. And he says, you know, the buck stops with him. Well, he just passes it when it comes to asking about the prudence that's necessary. I'm sure the Minister of the Environment, when it came to Bill 114, was saying, you know, this is a great thing because I don't want the girls of Holy Angels High School being affected from the noxious gas from a bus that's idling needlessly and costing taxpayers dollars the money we need to keep Holy Angels High School open. And I'm sure, and I'm positive the Minister of Community Services is going to want to go and deal with Bill 114 with the young women of Holy Angels High School, are going to want to talk to them that they are on the community services caseload. And she's going to say, I want you to get the best education at this best practices, all girls, only public high school east of Montreal, that she's going to want to improve their outcomes because their families are on community services, because I know it, because I live on the ground, and I'm sure that that Minister of Community Services is going to speak up for the young women of Holy Angels High School, because Bill 114 means about what it means to their future. And I know that minister is not going to mock those young women, is going to stand up for those young women, because Bill 114 should be all about what they deal with. And the Deputy Government House Leader, I'm sure, will speak for 114 and Holy Angels High School about the importance of this government stepping up and dealing with the real issues. Because tonight in Cape Breton, there's young women and their families looking at Bill 114 saying, what the heck does that have to do with the issues that are important with us? Because what's important to us is our education, and not a bus they know shouldn't be idling outside of Holy Angels, but there isn't going to be a Holy Angels if this lot is left to their measures of the day. But we know, Mr. Speaker, we know, and I know the Minister of Health knows that Bill number 114 is worthy of making sure that Holy Angels High School has an anti-idling policy so those young girls at Holy Angels High School have the best health outcomes they can have. But they do want a bus that won't idle in front of Holy Angels. So I know the Minister of Health is going to step up to the plate and make sure that Holy Angels High School is there. Mr. Speaker, I know the Minister of Economic and Rural Development knows that Bill number 114 is important to the people of Holy Angels High School because the economy is contingent on people understanding that anti-idling anti-idling policies of a government affects the outcome of young women that can be contributors and leaders to the business of this future of the economy of Nova Scotia. The Minister of Tourism, Culture and Heritage understands that future operators of inns, of tourism businesses, their livelihood is affected by Bill 114.
Order. I recognize the Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Before the member for Cape Breton North gets to me, could you ask them to get back to the bill at hand, please?
I recognize the member for Cape Breton North.
Before that interruption, how much time do I have left, Mr. Speaker?
Oh, 36 minutes.
Thank you very much. And I want, over the next 36 minutes, remind the Minister of Natural Resources that when I'm finished with the Minister of Tourism, Culture and Heritage, Mr. Speaker, that he will have a better understanding of what Bill 114 is doing to the young women of Holy Angels High School, Mr. Speaker, that he'll understand that the best natural resource is those younger women contributing to their province and the future of this province because they got the best education possible. The Minister of Natural Resources doesn't know that because he's gone down to Yarmouth County, doesn't deal with the issues there. Mr. Speaker, Bill number 114, if the Minister of Tourism, Culture and Heritage, the Minister of Economic and Rural Development doesn't recognize that Bill 114 should be placed in context with the future of the young women of Holy Angels High School, and that their vigil on Friday night, he should be there along with the whole cabinet. Mr. Speaker, we know that the Minister of Service Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations would have the most enthusiastic glee club in Nova Scotia of 299 young women that would support her and this government if they did the right thing for and by the students of Holy Angels High School. But Bill number 114, Mr. Speaker, and I see the Minister of Service Nova Scotia waving her hand and saying, you know, sing me a song. Well, you know what? I've got more respect for the young women of obviously of Holy Angels High School than that minister has to diminish what the importance of their education is, because she'll sit here and support this kind of drivel and idle like the rest of the government on Bill number 114. But I can tell her I'm seeing why she has a new immigration standard and wants to double immigration, because we're going to lose 299 bright young women from our province because she keeps being part of a government to drive them out. And that's what's happening because of bills like number 114, Mr. Speaker. That's why their immigration strategy, we got to import them because we're throwing them out. We're soon going to have Pier 21 to have a ship to take them away because they're driving them out. Mr. Speaker, that's what Bill 114 is talking about. And I know, Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Immigration, if she truly cared about anti-idling, would step up at the cabinet table and deal with Bill 114 and say, you know, the young women of Holy Angels High School are worth us, and stop the stalling and start the investing in the true priorities. Those are the issues, Mr. Speaker, that people in Cape Breton Island, those are the issues I'm sure that every county of this province, they'd like this government to deal with, but instead they'll hang out the young women of Holy Angels on the line, because now they have a clothesline bill, so they have an official entitlement to hang them out to dry, because we passed legislation to that effect. That's the government's policies and programs. But Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Natural Resources, you know, he's out there, Mr. Speaker, trying to suggest that we talk to this bill and get on. Well, I'm going to tell the minister, maybe he should spend some time and invest in a few more trees that could happen to put in some plain paper that could be written on, that maybe one of our mills could write paper for this government and that minister to put the guarantee that Holy Angels High School will be treated more important than Bill number 114. Maybe the Minister of Agriculture will stop producing manure that could fertilize. Maybe the Minister of Agriculture could deal with the biosolids issue and help people educate. I know that anti-idling, of course, will reduce emissions in the air, so that, you know, when he's dealing with other things with the agricultural community, he'll know that Bill 114 is something that he's prepared to commit to, so that our future generations will know the merits and benefits of all the things he's dealing with within his department. But you know, Mr. Speaker, he's not prepared to deal with those issues. And you know, Mr. Speaker, we get down the line and then we see where the Minister of Environment, the Minister of Fisheries, has brought this forward. And I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, from what I know of that good minister and that member of the House, he wouldn't come up with this sitting at home. He wouldn't come up with this. They're not down the wharfs of Shelburne telling him, by gosh, Minister, get that anti-island bill in. Our future, the fishing industry, has got many more pressing concerns than Bill number 114 with regards to this. Because that minister was concerned about the fishing industry, he'd do what's within his authority. What do you do? He'd issue a directive. He'd go to the cabinet table and say, I need a regulation because this is important and we got to stop anti-idling. That minister knows that, and he knows, just like the last bill we had on clotheslines was something we needed to appease somebody somewhere, but not deal with the pressing matters and the issues that are affecting Nova Scotians. And then we have the Premier. The Premier talking about all these great things. Oh, Minister, you're saying he's not here? The Minister of Community Service saying the Premier's not here. Well, where is he? I can tell you, Minister, where he's not. He's not down in Sydney talking to the young women about holy angels. He's not going to any vigil. And if anybody needs a vigil in this province, it's the Premier of Nova Scotia for doing what he's doing to those young women and not stepping up and providing the leadership that's required. That's the reality. And Mr. Speaker, I know the member for Halifax-Chebucto knows that if he had a chance to continue to support and tell people that the only public girls' school in Nova Scotia is more important than Bill number 114, I'm sure he'd do that, because I believe he would put people ahead of the politics of what we see with this drivel before the House. That's reality. Oh, it's whose bill? Oh, the member responsible for horses is saying this is the member of Halifax-Chebucto. Well, I'm not surprised at the same time. But even still, I would think the member responsible for horses would think that the young women, the 299 young women at Holy Angels High School, are more important than this bill, if you had priorities of what this House should be debating tonight. But I'll tell you, you talk about anti-idling. So we're wondering where the Premier is going to be. Because I know the member for Truro Bible Hill, if she had a choice to pick the future of 299 young women over an anti-idling policy that the Minister of Education or the Minister of Transportation or the Minister for Consumerism for vehicles could have done that, I'm sure she would pick the young women of Holy Angels High School. And I know the member from Pictou East with a great history in Cape Breton and goes down there in Louisbourg for those young women that are going to Holy Angels High School today, that he would say, you're more important than Bill 114, and I should be talking about you in the House of Assembly of Nova Scotia. I should be talking about your future, your investments that are needed for your education to contribute to be future women leaders, because you know what, Mr. Speaker, I know that member would say we need to have a young woman with the foundation that Holy Angels can provide to be a future Premier of this province, future Cabinet Minister, future leader of our economy, because I know the member for Pictou East would say that. At least he'd say it was in Cape Breton if he was wise, you know. And I know that our honourable colleagues from Cape Breton on the government side care about Cape Breton, but somehow the government agenda, well, Bill number 114 doesn't seem to factor in the importance of Holy Angels High School. And I'll tell you, Mr. Speaker, you talk about anti-idling. If the Minister of Finance wants to get up and talk about another bill, it can come another time, because right now the importance of Bill number 114 in context with what the government's agenda is must be something we bring forward. I know the members from the South Shore of Nova Scotia, I know those members would, if they had a choice to pick Bill 114 over the girls of Holy Angels High School, I know the girls of Holy Angels would have their voice to say, you are important and we need to invest in you. Your school's important. It's part of the fabric of the community of Sydney. It contributes from all the other schools that come in there. Of the 299, 172 are from the Sydney area. The rest come in from all the outlying communities. That's why it's important. I know if the board is talking about things, we've gone before the school board there in terms of ways we can make improvements. And one of the things we can do is get rid of some of the physical infrastructure that's not a priority. There's all kinds of things we could be talking, Mr. Speaker, in this House about. And I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, that Bill number 114 should be ranked up there and will now have ink in the Hansard to hopefully illustrate how this is as a bill relative to the other pressing needs of Nova Scotians. So I know when Friday night comes at 6 p.m. that there's going to be a whole host of government members that are going to want to go down to Sydney to Holy Angels and talk about how Bill number 114 is more important than they are. Bill number 114 is more important than their dreams and aspirations. That Bill number 114 somehow has greater weight to be talked about in this legislature than this thing about idling that should not have even had to be a bill. That's what we're coming to. And you know, Mr. Speaker, any more of these bills that come forward, we're going to be talking about the other relevance, that it goes back to the bills themselves, and this government's going to hear about it time and time again, because it's time, Mr. Speaker, that this charade is brought to a close. That this government, if it wants to say they have no agenda, just say it. We can respect them for that. If they've only got a couple, well, they are bankrupt in ideas, I give you that. If they only have a couple things to bring forward, bring a few things forward of substance for Nova Scotians, and let us get back to our offices where we could have been today, dealing with constituents' needs, dealing with their interests, dealing with the young women from Holy Angels that want to make sure this government understands the business case that means everything to their future. That's, Mr. Speaker, what we should be dealing with Bill number 114, but instead, here we are in the House of Assembly, $20,000 later, they'll spend on this, Bill number 114, but not invest in the future of those young women. That's what we face, Mr. Speaker. And I know, Mr. Speaker, the member from Antigonish, which is part of a community that has one of the institutions of this province everyone's very proud of, St. Francis Xavier, would understand that if he had to pick, I'm sure, Bill number 114 or the young women of Holy Angels High School, I know he would pick that the education of those young individuals of one-of-a-kind institution with a proud, long history in this province is something he want to invest in, because Holy Angels is right next door to Little X's property, as he would know, down in the north end of Sydney. That Bill number 114 is of no relevance down by Holy Angels. And why is it of any relevance here? It's not, because it didn't have to be. But you know what? We're paying more time to this, Mr. Speaker, than to Holy Angels. Well, I know the good people of St. Avex, if they had a choice, they'd want to keep Holy Angels open, because they'd see a school that has an excellence in outcomes should be something we would uphold and want to invest. Something you'd want to go and expand elsewhere in the province. And I know, Mr. Speaker, at Memorial Composite High School in Sydney Mines, the only composite high school in the province, I'm very pleased and proud of having there. Again, a school, the only of its kind, from trades training right up to honors, academic. All under one roof. Students come from throughout the board. We talk about it as being a model for the province. We're not talking about the investments that are needed there, where those students could be part of talking about the future of Nova Scotia and reducing emissions, dealing with education and standards, because they'd want to deal with the education of the fact that they have nearly 1,000 students going there. The buses are coming. They don't want buses idling. I can agree with that. So you have the support, I'm sure, of the students of Memorial Composite High School, Minister, because you would have had it anyway, because you could have done this, as you know, if you wanted to, or the Minister of Service Nova Scotia, or the Minister of Transport, or especially the Minister of Education. But she seems to want to be spending more time as Minister of Education talking about an anti-idling bill than dealing with the issues at Holy Angels, as those people try to deal with a future and making sure that 299 students are being taken care of and they're worthy of discussion in this House, but not worthy of consideration of the government. Now that is something that the government has to stop idling on and start dealing with, Mr. Speaker. But I can tell you as well, as we kind of focus as we move forward, and what I would hope is that all members, when they're in caucus, are going to stop and step back and say, what is this session about? What have we come to that we are now dealing with matters of this House? Now, I'm sure the Minister of Finance has got a bill to come up next that he would feel would have importance and have legitimacy for consideration here at 9:15 at night. But you know what? The Minister of Finance, aside from racking up a record deficit in the province and spending his time on that, has been part of a government that's in the House talking about Bill number 114 as a bigger priority than the bill the Minister would like to talk about this evening. But you know, the Minister is not talking about the 299 young women of Holy Angels and how they're important, worthy of his investment, because he's seen fit to cut checks for almost everything except the young women of Holy Angels. And he's probably going to cut the check to cover the cost of us spending time on this bill here tonight, but not cut a check to support the future of Holy Angels remaining in the community of Sydney, remaining as an institution within the area. And I know the people of Sydney are saying, Bill number 114 or Holy Angels High School, where do we want our tax dollars spent? Where do we want our legislatures having what topics do we want our legislatures talking about? I think they would want us talking about holy angels and talking about education in general and talking about the future, talking about the realities. If we need to talk about a bill to reduce costs and we need to talk about the environment, let's talk about in the House. Let's talk about what our future capital plan is going to be for schools. If we have to deal with tough issues, let's deal with them holistically. But so far, they've been cookie-cuttered. They've been cherry-picked by this government. And somehow, in the process of trying to appease some government members, we'll get rushing out announcements out the door to save some backbench ridings. We instead are willing to take an opposition riding in a school that's an institution in this province and throw it aside and say that Bill number 114 doesn't matter. That the people of Holy Angels don't matter, and Bill 1 number 14 is more important. Well, no, Mr. Speaker, because I know, Mr. Speaker, when I was on the government side, if there was an issue that the NDP didn't like, we heard about it. And I remember the Deputy Premier now, and when he was on the opposition side, and one of his dissertations said a pox on all their houses over there to the Tories. He did. He didn't answer it, so. And he said, one of these his arms were flailing and saying a pox on all their houses that they deal with these things. And here we are with a government that'll bring forward, and the Deputy Premier as House Leader call Bill number 114. You talk about anti-idling legislation needed. Well, we need to have in the cabinet room anti-idling legislation that will stop them from stalling on the issues that are important to Nova Scotians, such as Holy Angels High School and the future of 299 very good, young, well-rounded women that want a future, that are worth investing in, or worth attending at a university. And I know, whether it's Acadia University in the Valley, that they would choose the future of the lives of the young 299 young women of Holy Angels over Bill number 114. The Minister of Service Nova Scotia Municipal Relations, I'm sure, is very proud of that academic institution as well as her colleagues. But they also would say, why, Minister, are you talking about these types of things instead of the future of Holy Angels High School, instead of those individuals that matter, those people whose lives are being affected by the choices you're making, those people that your deficit you're racking up, don't even include an investment in them that they could give you a return for in the future to mitigate the financial mess the Minister of Finance is creating and continues to create and manifest. He won't invest in those young women who would be leaders of the future to create an economy, to get the dollars and grow things to the point that the revenues will come in and at least start paying back some of the mess that the Minister of Finance has been responsible for racking up. And you know, Mr. Speaker, here we are now at 9:20 talking about Bill number 114, and it does nothing. Nothing for the priorities, but I know on Friday night at 6 p.m. I'll be at Holy Angels High School.
Order. The honourable member for Cape Breton North has the floor.
Yes, and thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, because I know you want to hear clearly that Bill number 114 does nothing for the young women of Holy Angels High School, and that the young women of Holy Angels High School appreciate that somebody's standing up and speaking up for them when bills like this do nothing to deal with their future, Mr. Speaker. You would think, Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Health would want to deal with health and wellness and health promotion and making sure the investments are being made in the facility there so that 299 young women have a good, healthy future, a prosperous future built on health promotion and protection. But I don't think we're hearing that. But so she's idling and on Bill 114 rather than dealing with those issues. We have, Mr. Speaker, from one end to the other, a cabinet that has so many important things to deal with, and yet they bring Bill 114 to the floor of this legislature, and yet they will have the lives of 299 young women put on hold, dozens of more students not aware if they can have Holy Angels as a choice, to have it as an institution to carry on that great tradition of Cape Breton. And again, what we have, Mr. Speaker, is a government that's prepared to tie up the time of Nova Scotians, as I say, on drivel like Bill number 114. And they're more fixated on making sure. And I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Natural Resources, I know, wants to make sure that he can have specialists within his department in the future that have the basis of an academic foundation like Holy Angels can provide, so he can get better advice on bills to come forward better than 114. I know he wants to continue on that, and I'm sure when he goes back to the cabinet table, the Minister of Natural Resources will stay focused on what his real priority should be, rather than trying to interrupt and talk about bills like 114 and suggest that we move on and deal with other topics. But I can tell you, the Minister of Natural Resources wants to know that the young women of Holy Angels are counting on him and his role as Agriculture Minister to stand up and to reflect. Because I know as Agriculture Minister, there has to be students that come from the Cape Breton farming community that attend Holy Angels High School expecting the Minister of Agriculture to place more value on their education than on Bill number 114. And I know the Minister of Agriculture will want to continue that because of 4-H community. Members of Holy Angels that have a great tradition of the 4-H, that Minister of Agriculture will say, you're more important than Bill 114, and I'll stand up for you and make sure you have a future and stop the foolishness of this legislature from tying up time that otherwise could be going into important topics such as your future instead of this drivel. And I apologize. I'm sure the minister will go to Cape Breton and apologize to the young women for saying, I'm sorry for standing up in the House and saying that, this bill should be talked about rather than your future. I know that minister, when he goes to Cape Breton, will do it, because I know the Minister of Environment definitely knows the young women of Cape Breton at Holy Angels High School. If he had to make a choice, if Holy Angels in Shelburne, he'd be standing up for them. He'd be saying, you're worth more time in the legislature than the bill I brought, and I want to apologize for you for bringing in a bill I didn't have to bring in, the government didn't have to bring in. I'm sorry we wanted to count bills than rather count futures, and the futures of young women that are going to be negatively impacted because this government is sitting on their hands and spending time on bills like number 114 and clothesline bills and foolishness that could be put into more practical means than tying up this legislature. That's the reality. And I'm sure, Mr. Speaker, that the Minister of Education will be the spokesperson for all of Cabinet when she goes down to apologize for them for sitting in this House and saying that Bill 114 merited more time than Holy Angels High School future. I'm sure that when she was in Cape Breton and toured that school, she saw a school that was clean, that was well respected in terms of how it was maintained, that the students respected the school. I'm sure she saw that they weren't idling in the hallways doing graffiti, that they love the school they're from, and they respect the school they're from, and they respect the fact that they're more important than Bill 114. I know the Minister of Education will take more time, and she will go down there and say, I'm sorry that our government has wasted the time, and she will bring a message from the Premier to say we should have spent more time thinking of the future of students than the foolishness of bills that are irrelevant for consideration at the House of Assembly. That she's going to apologize for spending another $20,000 when she could have invested $20,000 here, when she could have invested $20,000 into the future and purchasing Holy Angels High School for the school board. But instead, the school board's looking at Bill number 114 saying, wow, $20,000, at least it's a start. Tomorrow's $20,000, there's a more start, and that's $40,000. That's all this government was investing in Holy Angels to lease it for a year. Not the equivalent of an FTE, but we'll spend the equivalent of an FTE to hold up this House, Mr. Speaker, on Bill 114. I think this government needs to seriously reflect on what bills like Bill 114 truly mean. And that the government, when they sit at their legislative process and they go to the departments, should be issuing a directive saying we need more quality. We need to be talking about the issues that matter most to Nova Scotians, such as Holy Angels High School and the future of young women who can be productive, contributing members of society, instead of sitting back watching on Ledge TV saying, what is the NDP government doing? Why aren't they speaking up for us? Why aren't they dealing with our future? Why are they squandering money needlessly through deficit and debt financing? Why aren't they investing in us? Why don't they believe that we will make better choices than they will make because we've got a better education? Then obviously no one over there has gone to Holy Angels, because I know they'd be speaking up and saying Holy Angels is worth the investment. It is worth saving. The Honourable Member for Victoria Lakes, it's worth saving. And the Honourable Member for Victoria Lakes knows that Bill 114 pales in comparison to his time on the school board. The member for Victoria Lakes knows all the details of trying to make a very large area, urban and rural, work for a school board. Mr. Speaker, those are the things that the member for Victoria Lakes would like to have us discussing here on the floor of the legislature. The types of discussion where the board has been told by the minister, go make your numbers work, without offering any support, with saying we'll support you, but all you have to do is provide us with choices of reducing or negating your services to the area. But that's not an outcome, and no different than any outcome we're going to get from Bill 114, Mr. Speaker. The Minister of Education knows that I would think she would want to consult with someone that was a long-standing member of the Cape Breton Victoria School Board, who worked across political lines, worked with all parties to make the school board work and function for the betterment of the students. The betterment of the students, and knowing they want a better education, not to have to look in the history books of Bill 114 and said, why did they want to tie this House time up and precious resources, then give us a better foundation in education. But that, Mr. Speaker, is what this House has been reduced to by this government. And I can tell you, Bill 114 is serving no purpose for any students across this province, let alone the ones for Holy Angels High School. But because they can't be seen here, because they can't get on a bus every day and travel to Halifax, because they had to spend their own resources, and some of us helped pitch in to try and provide some of the costs for them to come up and say, excuse me, Mr. Premier, excuse me, Madam Minister, excuse me, government members, but we're more important than your bloody Bill 114. That's the reality, Mr. Speaker. Those students can't come here every day because if they could, they'd be here every day. That's why, Mr. Speaker, Bill number 114 is probably not going to rank at their vigil on Friday night at 6 p.m. at Holy Angels High School. And I would like to say I would hope that everyone that can go will go to Holy Angels High School, 6 p.m. this Friday evening, and go and support the young women who think more of the future of Nova Scotia than the government does in Bill 114. That's something, Mr. Speaker, that's worth talking about in this House. And Mr. Speaker, those are the things that the Cape Breton Victoria District School Board would like this government to be talking about. That's the formula funding, not the cutbacks that the Minister of Finance has told them to reduce. They're talking about what are the key investments, strategic investments, the value-add investments, such as in the future of 299 students that deserve a future with a government that will stand with them and recognize the return on investment will be 40, 50, 100-fold because we're investing in the future of people that will sustain this government and people we have to rely on to try and eradicate the debt that is being driven up needlessly by a Minister of Finance and a government that doesn't care about the bottom line, doesn't care basically about the basic line of education, but will put things like Bill 114 before the House. And I know the Minister of Natural Resources wants to make sure that he's paying attention at the cabinet table so that in the future he'll say, stop wasting valuable trees on paper such as Bill 114 and let's start investing in futures such as that of Holy Angels High School and the 299 students that are there and the dozens more and hundreds more in the future that would like to go there. Mr. Speaker, they'd like to know that paper is being printed that has words that recommend and support them, but instead what they have is a government that is pushing them aside with a committee that they hope will be able to diffuse things until they get out of this chamber, Mr. Speaker, and hope that things like Bill 114 have more attention than their needs and their future. Well, that's not happening, as you can tell, Mr. Speaker, and if we're going to be here, then we're going to start talking about these issues and relating every bill back to the very core priorities that Nova Scotians have, so that people like at Holy Angels will know that we're spending time talking about their priorities rather than a government agenda that's driven by counting numbers rather than counting people as their priority. That's what we have, Mr. Speaker. Counting numbers rather than counting people as priorities in this province. That's what Bill number 114 has come to. That's the reality of what we're dealing with. So, Mr. Speaker, I would hope that over the course of the next few moments that I have left, and I have how much left?
Almost 20 minutes left, member.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the member for Sackville-Cobequid for encouraging me and putting his finger up, because I know he's saying he supports the young women of Holy Angels High School, and he says that Bill 114 isn't as important as them. That's what the member for Sackville-Cobequid, I'm sure, is indicating here this evening. And you know, the member for Sackville-Hammonds Plains, or what is it called? Sackville-Hammonds Plains. What is it now? Hammonds Plains, Upper Sackville. Yes, every election changes over there, it seems. Hammonds Plains, Upper Sackville. He, as a young page in this House that learned about the institutions, Mr. Speaker, and now went out and put his name on the ballot in democracy, he would know that the young women of Holy Angels High School are worth investing so that they have a good foundation of an education. He appreciates in this House that we should be spending time as a young person supporting other young persons to have a foundation and be worthy of investment rather than time and things such as Bill number 114. That, Mr. Speaker, is something I believe to be true. For the member for what is it? Sackville-Hammonds Plains? Upper Sackville-Hammonds Plains. I mean, it leaves such a memorable impression. He doesn't get to speak. I'm sorry. You don't get to speak very often. But I wish you would speak about Bill 114 in relation to Holy Angels High School, because as the deputy, what is he now? Whip. Oh, and you're chair of the Glee team, so I hope you're cheering for Holy Angels High School. There must be a cheer in there for the new chair of the Glee Club that the Minister of Service Nova Scotia, and that they, while they're putting up clotheslines, will speak positively of Holy Angels High School and why that should be having more time spent on it than putting clotheslines up around Halifax right now. That the member... What? No, that the member will understand that bills such as the clothesline bill and now this bill with regards to anti-idling are not the priorities of average Nova Scotians, of sincere Nova Scotians that think that this legislature, Mr. Speaker, is going to spend time and effort on outcomes that are going to make a difference, a real difference. But again, we have to add numbers rather than adding up our priorities, and that's a sad day here. Mr. Speaker, you know, when a government, in the manner in which it has, can go and put bills like this forward, when the ministers know that they have the authority and the ability to do this. You know, Mr. Speaker, I know the minister responsible for housing in Nova Scotia knows that Bill number 114 is taking up valuable time and money and resources that could otherwise go into housing units for those students that might go to Holy Angels and need better quality housing, need investments that go to the core of their community. That's what that minister, I'm sure, is aware of, because I know that young women should be more important than Bill 114 as window dressing. I know the minister would never go to Cape Breton and tell those students that they're less important than Bill 114. Couldn't be. She wouldn't. I don't think she would. I know she wouldn't, Mr. Speaker. But I know she's part of a government that thought it was okay to bring in bills such as 114 and think you could get away with it and they'll go through and we'll take credit for it. That's what's happened, Mr. Speaker. They actually thought that Nova Scotians wouldn't pick up on this numbers game they're running here, and doing things that they never had to bring to the floor of the legislature, doing things that never required having to come here, doing things that they could have communicated to the stakeholders there, but at the same time, they're not doing things like they should be doing, but instead they spend time on 114 rather than priorities and problems and a crisis at Holy Angels High School. That's what we have. When 299 young women are left at the curbside, you know, I wish the Dexter bus can stop idling. I mean, the Dexter bus apparently, I mean, that's one that they can shut off for good, Mr. Speaker. They can just shut her down, take the wheels off, or put her on the blocks. The Dexter bus has already caused enough damage. Take her off. I don't care if it's diesel gas. It's caused a lot of problems. It's taken too many victims. Now, there is a bus worth stopping forever, Mr. Speaker. The Dexter bus has wreaked enough havoc, yet we have bills like 114 will tell everyone else that are trying to do good work what they should do when they already know common sense would do what this bill is saying, that a directive, that a policy would do what this bill is saying. And you know, I'd understand about putting laws in place, Mr. Speaker. The Minister of Justice does not need to have bills and laws in place that he's cutting back on policing and authorities to enforce. Who's going to enforce it? The Glee Club? Are they going to start enforcing for the Minister of Justice? Maybe that's where they're getting money for the expense accounts for the Glee Club, because they're taking the boots off the street, and bills like Bill 114, they're going to go out and they're going to start doing pressure. Okay, they're going to go do it to tire gauges and make sure the tires at the right gauge. And are the engines running or not? They'll give them stethoscopes just so they can listen and make sure, Mr. Speaker, the engines are off. That they can make sure that the time that they're prepared to waste as a government is really going to a true effect, and that the wasteful measures such as bills like this are equally paired with wasteful activities of a government rather than the rightful thing of supporting people like the students of Holy Angels, their future, and the education of young people who are expecting that they are going to be given wisdom and knowledge from this legislature, that they're going to have a foundation of understanding that bills before this House mean something to them, mean something to their families, mean something to their communities. But the only thing mean right now, Mr. Speaker, is the government. The government's being mean to people, the students of Holy Angels, to the families that send their children to Holy Angels, to the community businesses that rely on Holy Angels, the local convenience store, that has been, quite frankly, their livelihood being associated area. But the government doesn't care because Bill 114 is more important than small business. Because I know the Minister of Rural and Economic De-development or undevelopment or non-development, whatever he wants to call himself now, is not prepared to invest and recognize that local communities have to be part of a diversified and varied base that ensures that they have the type of vitality in place. But we don't see that at Holy Angels, and we definitely don't see that coming out of Bill 114, Mr. Speaker. That's what we've now found that this government has reduced themselves to and this legislature to. So, Mr. Speaker, as we go forward, if the government wants to bring more bills before this House, well, we're going to be up and it's going to be a long session. You know, Mr. Speaker, it's going to be a real long session because after a bill like this, maybe a serious matter is going to come up. Why haven't we dealt with the serious matters at the front end of this session? Why hasn't the government, instead of Bill 114, brought the priority issues that the Nova Scotians have thought we were coming to this sitting for and to deal with them? But they haven't. They've thrown bill after useless bill into this House, done things they never had to do, wasting valuable taxpayers' resources. And, Mr. Speaker, none of those things. So if the minister gets up and says we're, tying up time or they're filibustering, Mr. Speaker, we're speaking out against this government's wrong-headed initiatives, what they're bringing forward to this House. Mr. Speaker, Bill number 114 does nothing to improve what should have been a long-standing tradition of this House of thoughtful debate, of second sober thoughts so they could deal with these things. You would think that the government would want to have that type of dialogue. You would think that the government, rather than Bill 114, would want to talk about the future of all of Nova Scotians, deal with the financial pressures, put ideas for economic development, get consensus, get support for a government agenda, but instead they'll tie up time with Bill number 114, Mr. Speaker. Instead, Mr. Speaker, they'll deny young women at Holy Angels High School a future or access to a future, but they'll tie up this House. They will hold up the future of Nova Scotians because they have a political agenda that says we're right and everyone else is wrong. And if we're not going to have a chance to come back, we're going to put every bloody bill we possibly can through to appease every special interest we possibly can through. And that's what they're going to do because there's a chicken in every pot.
Order. I have to remind the honourable member for Cape Breton North that the word bloody is unparliamentary. And if he could remove it from further I recognize the honourable member for Cape Breton North.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and I do recognize that when you deal with the issues of such concern and passion to the people of Cape Breton, such as Holy Angels High School, the wrong word may come out. But the mess this government has made, Mr. Speaker, the utter mess, the disastrous mess, the debt-ridden mess this government has created after a balanced budget have voted against, the debt they brought in, and now a structural debt that the Minister of Finance wants to say he created and takes credit for now, and I'm glad to see he's doing that. I'm glad that their own auditors have confirmed that Bill number 114 paled in comparison to other issues they should be dealing with. I'm glad that the Minister of Finance knows that Deloitte had said, their own auditors, that they went out and spent another king's ransom on, verified in public accounts that what they were talking about was wrong, that their numbers were wrong, that in fact there was a balanced budget, that there was no cooked books in the province of Nova Scotia, and that in fact we should have been proceeding with a balanced budget to move forward so issues such as those of the before Holy Angels High School instead of Bill 114 would be a priority of this government. But instead, what we do, 120 million and counting invested in dirt rather than people. That's the reality, and here we have Bill 114 talking about idling rather than the ideologies that should be coming forward, the consensus that should be brought, Mr. Speaker, so that issues such as Holy Angels High School staying in the north end of Sydney where it is and being improved upon should be the priority of discussion and debate here. Talking about the curriculum, the Minister of Education should be talking about the future curriculum that's required for those students, and talking about things rather than Bill 114 that she herself could have put in her own directive to deal with this, but she wanted to distract away. The Minister of Education wanted to distract away from what she's not doing rather than what she should be doing for the students of Holy Angels High Schools. And at the vigil on Friday night at 6 p.m. in the north end of Sydney at Holy Angels High School, community and family and students shall gather. And you know, the candles that are burning won't be Christmas candles, and they won't be candles of joy. They're going to be candles of hope. Hope of 299 students and their family and community and businesses. Hope that this government will see the light and stop doing things like Bill 114 and start dealing with the real priorities, such as their education, as a foundation for the other young women in the Cape Breton Victoria District School Board that are looking for a foundation that others have benefited from, others that have come up and said, you know, if it wasn't for Holy Angels, I wouldn't be the woman I am today, is what people have said to me in very successful careers. That's what they're saying, Mr. Speaker, but now we have a current generation where that's in peril. We have future generation of students that are wondering if that would ever even possibly be the case, and a government that wants to bring before this House Bill number 114 and tie up this House, and more importantly, highlight the negative things that are happening. And I can, you know, I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, those students expect more from this government. They thought they were going to get more from this government because that's what they sold in their propaganda and the brochures. They promised the moon and the stars. They promised they would honor commitments. But you know what? Apparently a commitment to a quality education was like other ones, like the jail and supporting the ferry service in Yarmouth and dealing with priorities Nova Scotians. That, Mr. Speaker, they thought that they actually honor those commitments and honor a fundamental commitment to do the right thing. But instead, a vigil is being held on Friday night, not about Bill 114. They're not going to be worried about a bus idling because they may not have a bus in front of their school to idle. But a vigil on Friday night at 6 p.m. will be held for people that are going to be calling out for this government to have a heart and to do the right thing and be what they said they would be for Nova Scotians. And I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, we were down on the ground in Cape Breton and supported the honourable member for Cape Breton South in his support as the local MLA for that school in his constituency. And we stood there across party lines. And you know, Mr. Speaker, Bill number 114 wasn't part of the priorities and the discussions of that day. The discussion was about these young women and the community and the strength of a community that's being weakened by this government, that's being hurt by a government that will bring bills like 114 before this legislature, by a government that will not sit at the table with the Cape Breton Victoria School Board and work sincerely with them. Be forthright and be clear on what it is. If the member for Sackville-Cobequid wants to get up on his feet there, you know, he can get up, Mr. Speaker. There'll be a chance to debate. If the member for Sackville-Cobequid wants to do the right thing, and in caucus he would say we should do the right thing for and by Holy Angels High School instead of Bill 114. Instead of Bill 114. But he doesn't care, Mr. Speaker, because he's sitting over there and he's worried about being, you know, he's in here and he can't upset the apple cart too much because he's this close, he thinks, to cabinet. So he just got to be so careful, Mr. Speaker, not to say anything to offend cabinet. But he'll say, yes, you know, 114 is good. Good, I'm just the Deputy House Speaker and I'm going to make sure that bill gets through. You know, if the House Leader's not there. You know, it's like Odie. He's just there. He's panting the whole time. Am I doing a good job? You know, can I get that bill through? He's not over there talking about Holy Angels High School like we are. He's not over there saying what a priority and how misguided the government is and its priorities for Nova Scotians, such as Holy Angels High School. He's not talking to the Minister of Education about what she should be doing and the Minister of Finance for the ill-headed things that they're doing against proper investments in this province and expenditures that make a difference and have a return on investment. A return on investment, Mr. Speaker, education, we all know. One of the best things, the Minister of Justice might cut back in the justice system, take boots off the street, create more issues in terms of safety on the streets, but we know the fundamental thing to a good economy is a good education, and that you cannot be, and in this modern age, have a diversified economy if you don't have one of the best educated and well-rounded and diversified people. And the people that need an education that knows enough to look at Bill 114 and say, this ain't nothing. Mr. Speaker, this isn't worth the paper it's written on because the government could have saved the paper, done the right thing, implemented these things, and got on with spending time in this legislature dealing with important issues such as the education of young women of Holy Angels High School. And I know the members for Lunenburg would know, and district, if they had a choice to pick Bill 114 over Holy Angels High School, I'm only suspecting they would pick Holy Angels High School. Because I know, Mr. Speaker, when the Lunenburg Academy needed investment and we were on the government side, we understood you make the investment. A historic institution in that community that needed some resources, the resources were provided. The members stood up, and no one was saying that that investment was wrong because it went to the quality of education and provided for safety and security and the proper environment for an old building that needed modern amenities to operate within the code. Those things were fine. Those weren't the types of things that would be in Bill 114. Mr. Speaker, we thought that this government, when it came to power, after its glossy election propaganda brochures said that they were going to do, put the House back to work, Mr. Speaker. Bill number 114 breaks a government promise, breaks a commitment the Premier said he would do, because in their brochure it said, we're going to put the legislature back to work. Well, my gosh, we might as well be a chain gang. Collecting garbage would do more for the environment than this bill is going to do right here, Mr. Speaker. Would have more value going along the highways, picking up some cans and recycling them. At least people would benefit. But instead, we'd have, and I'm sure the buses we would be on to go do that wouldn't idle. But instead, we're talking about Bill 114 instead of other priorities such as Holy Angels High School. That's what this government reduced themselves to, because they said they were going to put the legislature back to work. Well, Mr. Speaker, if you call this work, if you call this bill work, this bill is a government bill. It's not an opposition bill, not a private member's bill. It's a government bill that they own. And if they don't like the commentary in this House in response to our democratic right to stand up here as duly elected official members of this legislature on behalf of the people to say that Holy Angels is more important than Bill 114, then I don't care if they don't like it, Mr. Speaker, because the people of Holy Angels and across Nova Scotia don't care that they don't seem to care about the priorities of Nova Scotians. What they care about is this government getting back to work, and if this government was truly committed to doing what they said in their brochure, they'd stop the petty politics of bills that just don't add up to the priorities of Nova Scotians, such as Bill 114. And I'll tell you, Mr. Speaker, if this legislature wants to get back to work, it could get to the serious issues at hand. The Minister of Finance could step up to the plate and start being forthright with Nova Scotians and start making the investments that matter most to Nova Scotians, could start doing the right thing, could start working across party lines to say there are issues that can get consensus, but instead we're talking about bills like 114 and bloody clotheslines, Mr. Speaker. Oh, yeah.
Remind the honourable member that the word bloody is unparliamentary, and if he could remove it from further presentation in the House. And I do recognize the honourable member for Cape Breton North for his final 10 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I, again, on behalf of the people of Nova Scotia, retract the word bloody, but I want to emphasize their passion that this government and this legislature get back to work on their behalf. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Order. I recognize the honourable member for Argyle.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And with all the excitement we had this evening, I thought it'd be great to stand and speak for another 10 minutes or so on this one until, of course, our time expires. And I'm going to be very happy to speak to Bill number 114. I need to thank the member for Cape Breton North for his impassioned speech and for his protection of his area and the individuals therein. Including the people of Holy Angels and the injustice that they're feeling at the hands of this NDP government. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to speak on the other end of the province where this government has been more than successful, Mr. Speaker, more than successful at idling something, at idling of shutting down the idle of the CAT ferry, the ferry service that travels from Yarmouth to New England. They were really good at that one. They didn't need a bill to do that. They didn't need a bill to do that, just like they don't need a bill today to talk about the idling of I believe, school buses, Mr. Speaker, and other buses, transit buses and tour buses and those kinds of things. Mr. Speaker, this requires a policy. The member for Dartmouth East spoke very eloquently about this a little earlier on the things that are actually already being done in the province of Nova Scotia insofar as anti-idling policies or anti-idling requirements. Mr. Speaker, I remember walking into the car dealership that I deal with here in Halifax, Volkswagen dealership, Hillcrest Volkswagen, and they've had an anti-idling policy there as long as I've owned a car. This is something that private industry, that bus industry, that other people have brought forward and have been more than happy to discuss and bring forward to the public in Nova Scotia. Why is this showing here today as Bill number 114? This should be no more than a policy that the Minister of Environment, that the Minister of Service Nova Scotia, the Minister of Community Services, the Minister of Education should be putting forward as a policy within department. Mr. Speaker, I can say right now that I'm going to try my best as an MLA, as a member of this House, that I will not idle my car more than I have to. Mr. Speaker, I wonder how many people in this House actually have car starters who every morning when it's cold outside start their car up and wait till it warms up in their parking lots. Why don't we outlaw things like that? Why don't we talk about idling boats? Why don't we talk about idling trucks? All those things that really, Mr. Speaker, are causing far more CO2 emissions than anything that we're talking about here tonight. That's the issue of this bill before us today. The member for Cape Breton North spoke, I think, very well in his support for his community, and I'm going to speak to mine, Mr. Speaker. We should be talking about important things to Nova Scotians, and that is the economy, that is health care, that is jobs, Mr. Speaker. They have been successful, once again, in idling probably, 800 cars? How many jobs have gone missing in this last number of months under the watch of this NDP government? What was the last number? I think it was like 800 or something like that. People have lost their jobs in the last few weeks. Well, that's 800 cars really that are not idling. They're sitting in their driveways, not being used because people have lost their eye on the ball of what's important to Nova Scotia, what's important to what needs to be happening. Mr. Speaker, Bill 114, I mean, my goodness. I mean, how short a bill can we possibly do? This is a good idea. Hey, on face value, you would look at this and say, great, we're talking about anti-idling legislation in Nova Scotia. You know, and I know the member is the Minister of Environment is agreeing on face value. But what does the bill really mean? And I know I can't go clause by clause on that in this House. It's not something that I can do, but it wouldn't take me very long to go clause by clause on this because this is a nothing bill. This goes to what we've been saying all along, that there is no legislative agenda for this House of Assembly, for this government. They should be talking about, again, the important things, bringing them forward for wholesome discussion in this House of Assembly. They should be talking about what's the future for Yarmouth, Nova Scotia? What's the future for southwestern Nova Scotia when it comes to their economy and the tourist industry there? You know, they idled the cat. They put her down. They shut it down. There's been no talk up to now except for a quick discussion that apparently the Premier had, or the Mayor brought forward, the possibility of a new ferry for Yarmouth. But, Mr. Speaker, again, Bill 114 really doesn't speak to that, nor does it speak to the member that was probably impacted just as much as the member for Yarmouth, or the member for Argyll, or the member for Clare. That's the member for Shelburne, the Honourable Minister of Environment. Why isn't he talking about idling the cat in this one? He should be. He should be, because he's been affected. Just recently, the Queen's Council was talking about the hit to their economy, to their stats of I believe, what was it? Almost a 15% drop in tourist visits in southwest Nova Scotia, in the Queens County area alone. Mr. Speaker, I believe it was 61%. Thank you very much to the member for Yarmouth for fixing the number on that. It's a heck of a lot bigger than what I had been estimating. Mr. Speaker, we should be talking about things that are substantial to Nova Scotia, things that are important to Nova Scotia, talking about something that could have been done by ministerial decree is not something that should have been before this House of Assembly. No different than the clothesline bill that was before it or anything else that we're talking about here tonight. Mr. Speaker, I know the Glee Club will probably do its best to talk about what's important for suburban Nova Scotia. This might be one of them. Maybe they'll be going and knocking on windows as people are idling on the freeway, trying to get home to suburbia. You know, maybe I'll provide stickers. I will use my expenses. I'll provide some stickers. Maybe you can provide a little summary offense ticket to the people as you're walking your way down to Sackville or to Beaverbank or to all those areas that people need to get out to and spend lots of time. We should be talking about transit policy. That would be a great idea to talk about tonight. There's talk about buses. There should be talks about light train. There should be talking about ferries. Mr. Speaker, there's all kinds of things that we could be talking about instead of an anti-idling policy for the government of Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, this is well within the capabilities or the legislative right of the cabinet to create a decree, to create a policy, to make sure that this doesn't happen with the buses and the infrastructure that we do have in the province of Nova Scotia. I would love to talk about this a little bit more. I will take my time, I believe, tomorrow or the next day when this is brought up, but at this time I would really like to adjourn debate on Bill number 114.
I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Did you vote on adjourn?
Sorry. The motion before the House is for adjournment. All those in favour? Aye. Against? I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Well, I thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, with that settling debate, that closes the government's business for the night. We will, tomorrow after the daily routine, be calling bills for second reading. We'll be calling bills 88, 114, 115, 118, 119, 120. We do now wish you to rise, Mr. Speaker, for the House to meet between the hours of 2 p.m. and 8 p.m.
The motion before the House is that we meet again tomorrow at the hour of 2 o'clock. I move adjournment.